what I want out of this exercise of doing these deep dives is to find those other meanings that we can draw upon, depending on the question, the moment, the querent, the energy, everything else that's going into the reading. And this, to me, really captures that. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Blushing Nerd Tarot. Today, we're going to do episode 2 of Nerd Out, Deep Dive. And I did not do a little mini short, rather, for the dice roll today. But what I did do, I rolled a 6 and am going to cover the lovers. So what I'll do today, then, at the end of this video, I will go ahead and roll for the next one. So then you'll know what's coming up next. And it's fewer videos I have to try to put out then. If I would do those shorts for every roll, it just ends up having me do more editing and things that I really don't care to get into. So the lovers. Another very interesting one, following up on the High Priestess here. I'll just start with the RWS. If we just take a look here, there's so much going on, and I'm gonna swap cameras so we can make sure we see the important stuff here. So on the lovers card, we have much to consider. If we start right at the top, we have a giant sun that is very prominent, along with, of course, the letter 6 Roman numerals, which we'll get into a little bit too for the 6. Then we have what can either be depicted as an angel or a cherub. In this case, we have the angel, which is said to be Raphael, floating on a cloud. Down below that, and skipping the characters for now, we have a mountain in the background, which I'll tell you I love in this no copyright 1971 version of the Rider-Waite deck. The coloration on this is amazing in person. You can't quite pick up all of that on the camera shot, but there's a heavy dose of pink and purple, which you may notice that those are favorites of mine. But the way they're carried out here, the way the line work is done and the coloration, it's pretty fantastic. It's an exercise in values, and what it does is it allows us to catch that nice hint of sunlight just grabbing the edge of that mountain. And then we also see a little bit of blue there in the foreground. That would indicate just sort of another rise there, so that there's sort of a gentle slope coming back toward us. And then below that, we have water, a bit of a sea in front of that mountain. So we have a couple different elements at play there. And we have the foreground then, on which our characters are standing, along with 2 trees. And on one side, we have the tree of life, also considered the burning bush because of the burning motif on those branches. On the other side, we have the tree of knowledge. It's the apple tree with the serpent. And then we have our lovers, the characters on the card. So a lot to unpack here, a lot to think about. And where to start? We'll get into, I also have a Marseille, copy of the Jean Dodal here, and see if we can get my camera to decide. There we go. What to focus on. I like that candle a lot. Can't blame it. So I have a list here. I've taken some notes to go along with some of the reading I did in advance of this. Just some basic keywords from the Tarot Bible. Tarot Bible by Sarah Bartlett. Great little resource. Nice to have around. Keywords in there are love, of course, completeness, choice, temptation, and commitment. Um, so again, the symbolism. The characters can be thought of as Adam and Eve in this depiction, certainly in the Rider-Waite-Smith. Adam and Eve come to mind because of that tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, just from the old Adam and Eve tale from the Bible. So um, the mountain, in some respects, is thought of as a phallus and is countered by the vessel that is sort of the water feature below that also does have a vessel type shape to it rather than just being a completely flat um, body of water. So those are two elements of those portions of the imagery that we can think of. We also have we have the serpent that's on or the snake on that tree of knowledge, and we all probably know the story of Adam and Eve, but that is important if that's a factor that we're going to consider here. The burning bush is interesting as well, so that also um, has the Kabbalistic symbolism built into it because there are 12 flames or 12 elements on that tree of life there. So the Kabbalistic imagery comes into play here, something that I think was important to Waite. And then the large sun looming over all of it does give a very positive feel to the overall imagery, and of course ties it into other cards in the tarot, in the majors. So that's something to consider. We have, the angel or cherub. We see a cherub in the Marseille. Quite a different depiction here, but we still have some continuity. We have the big sun behind. We lack any sort of background or foreground in terms of land. We just see basic land mass back there, essentially. But I'm interested in talking about this one a little bit more in terms of the popular depictions that I've heard sometimes for this card versus some other interesting things that I've read recently. And then, beyond those basic images, what are some other ways to interpret this? So I did look at a few different resources to try and find out how are other folks depicting this card in terms of keywords and ways to interpret it. Um, and from Benabel Wen's book, Holistic Tarot, she lists passion, partnership, ethics, and primordial choice. And I like that primordial choice portion, particularly if we're looking. I mean, the choice portion can come into play for either depiction here. Primordial choice, though, that does play into the Bible story with Adam and Eve and making that choice for knowledge, in exchange for the peaceful bliss of Eden. So basically, another way to look at these, oftentimes we do think about for Marseille, there's a lot of times, and actually, Gerald, Richie, and Ben recently did a video. I believe it was the three of them that did a video on the Morgan Greer tarot and in the sense of direction. I believe I hope I'm not misquoting there. If I am, I'm going to change it in the description below, or but I'll link the video talking about the characters in the in the Morgan Greer and how there's directionality in the way they're looking. And I think that is always a key part for me in looking at a lot of Marseille imagery. But it's also, so the Marseille, of course, we can see here in this case, both of the female characters are looking at the male character, and he is looking essentially sort of at us. Um, so there are a couple different ways to think about that for Marseille and what those. And also, interestingly, as well, we notice that the cherub is blindfolded. So, um, but look at the RWS, and we have the Adam character looking at the Eve character, and the Eve character is looking at the heavens or at the angel. So, what's the significance there? We could think of that a few different ways, but I believe, let's see, we had some. Yeah, so what Benabel said in Holistic Tarot was, rather than romance, this card may be interpreted as presenting or representing moral choice, choosing the correct path. And this gets to that duality that I like so much with the Lover's card. Um, two things existing in parallel, and duality also in terms of choice. And obviously, Adam and Eve, there was a choice. With the Tarot de Marseille, we see depicted here possibly a choice. And again, that's the popular description that I've heard, is that this is a young man choosing between two lovers. Yes, okay, perhaps that's true. Perhaps that's the basic way to look at it, and that's fine. But I think that is indicative of a deeper meaning. We don't necessarily need to take that at face value. That it's just someone choosing between two people. I think that's not the deepest way we can really consider it. Um, for the other portions of this, that tree of life, the again, the primordial choice there with the apple that Eve is presented with, and choosing between the mind and the heart, also important considerations. The primordial responsibility to choose ethically. So that's a key part for this for me. A primordial responsibility to choose ethically. Interesting way to put that, right? Because that is telling us that if this comes up in a reading, it's less about the movie depiction that this means that there's some romance coming into your life. And that's probably not what we're talking about here. It's that you may be faced with a choice, and you have the responsibility to choose ethically. Whether you act on that and take that responsibility to heart or not is up to you. And not everybody's going to do that the same way, and that's fine. Um, but we can think of it that way. Also, so there's a couple of here's a book plug actually. This is a book I haven't talked about before because it is new to me. However, it's also new to the world, and it is it's a chunky boy. I can't even fit it all in if I wanted to. This is a big book called The Tarot. It's beautiful, right? A collection of secret wisdom from tarot's mystical origins. What this is actually it's a collection of books. Ultimate Guide to the Untold Mysteries and Lost Knowledge of the Tarot. I may do a separate video at some point on this book, because there's so much going on here. But what we have is essentially a collection of all sorts of tarot books over the ages. And we go way back into history here with this, and it gives you all kinds of information from. I believe there was some references to Christian mysticism, Kabbalistic views and things, but then some more traditional from early 20th century authors, some some considerations for interpreting tarot and the sources of the information. It's just I mean, this is a book that you could really spend some serious time with. It is not an inexpensive book. Um, I believe, let's see, yeah, $54. Um, it's from St. Martin's Essentials. St. Martin's Press, I believe, is the publisher name. But St. Martin's Essentials is the specific publishing group. I will link this if possible. I'm going to try to find a place for folks to go get it if they are interested. There may be cheaper resources out there too, or places to get it. I bought it from a local esoteric shop. So, paying full retail in that case generally, unless they're having a sale. But I also do like to buy from the local shop when possible and support them. So from that book, um, there's a section, it's an excerpt from The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It was written in 1928. And in that portion for the lovers, um, page 852 in this big book, if you're looking for it, in the Tarot de Marseille, it says the maidens represent the twofold soul of man. And I'm taking that as man, as in humanity, or of humans, the twofold soul of humanity, and I'll just substitute there. And that twofold soul they're referring to is the split between the spiritual and the animal. So, and they say that the first, so we have what we could say is the querent in the middle, and then on either side we have the representations of the twofold soul, and spiritual and animal. The first is his guardian angel. The second is the ever-present demon. So that's interesting to think about, because I don't know if you recall back in the day, and maybe they still do depict this way, but I remember seeing cartoons as a kid. It seemed like a common theme when somebody was trying to resolve some sort of conflict, inner conflict. Up would pop the devil on one angel, or on one shoulder, and the angel on the other shoulder, and they would sort of, spar it out, to sort of give that image of the internal conflict that the main character was having with something. And that is what is being suggested here by the author of the Secret Teachings of All Ages. And I really like that, because it gets rid of that, I hate to say shallow, but it does feel like there's less depth if we just look at this as a person choosing between two lovers. I feel like that's incomplete for me. That doesn't quite do it. So what I like about this is, instead, it's talking about that duality. It's drawing that out of that character, that central character. The querent has this conflict, maybe an internal conflict about a situation where they have basically a split, and there are two options. There's a duality, there's a dual reality, there's a condition where they can go this way or that way, and one will represent what Benabel talked about, with that the moral, let's see, I don't want to misquote, the primordial responsibility to choose ethically, right? So one would represent that, the ethical choice, and one would represent the less than ethical choice, I guess. I think that's a great way to look at this card. It's really exciting for me, because I think it adds so much depth, and it could be that maybe maybe it changes depending on the question or the reading at the time, or the other cards that come up around it, because this could be a relationship card. Maybe it is just talking about love and in a relationship and commitment and those sort of things. But what I want out of this exercise of doing these deep dives is to find those other meanings that that we can draw upon, depending on the question, the moment, the querent, the energy, everything else that's going into the reading. And this, to me, really captures that. So I think that is pretty fantastic. And then let's take another look back in that same book. Um, we have an excerpt from another book, and again, this is a collection. So that entire book, that big, it's called the Tarot. It is essentially just a collection of other people's writings. It is either complete works that are captured in there, or certain chapters that apply to tarot specifically. And we have an excerpt from The Magical Ritual of the Sanctum Regnum. That was written in 1896. And we have the statement: equilibrium results only from the opposition of forces. So, again, I'll pause there because there's more to this quote. But the opposition of forces, what if we think about the lovers as an opposition of forces? That duality becomes an opposition, but is it perhaps, conflict, I think, is too strong of a word. What we think about it and when we think about a duality, we can think about a parallel existence. We can think we should open our minds to the possibility that that two realities can exist at once, and maybe our job, either as querents, is to ask the question, or as readers is to help bring clarity to that duality. So let me continue. So that portion: equilibrium results only from the opposition of forces. The active has no existence without the passive. So the active has no existence without the passive. Light without darkness produces no form. And affirmation can only triumph over negation. That is quite a stuffed full quote. um, think about that. I think it was the third portion. Light without darkness produces no form. Wow. How true is that? Yeah. If something's completely washed out with light, we say washed out because all of the details are taken away. So there's no form. And I like, you could watch, my mind's kind of going all over the place here, but if you watch Tarology, Enrique Enriquez's documentary about Tarot de Marseille, or just tarot in general, but just his way of doing things, his thoughts on consonants and vowels in language is reminiscent of this to me. If I were to make an interpretation here, I would say that consonants represent the darkness and vowels the light. So if we had nothing but vowels, nothing would have shape. It would just be bare sound without any sort of anchors to give everything structure. And I think the same can be said here for that balance of light and darkness. Without darkness, nothing would have form. So I love that. And then also, affirmation can only triumph over negation. Boy, that's a that could get into all sorts of realms for us. That could get into politics and current affairs and all sorts of other things that I don't really want to get into ever, given what we've been up against for years now. But so just again, everything points to duality. Everything points to this this presence of two in one. And I think I'd like to, personally, I want to meditate on that as the deeper meaning on this card. So to extend on duality again, the Dictionary of Symbols. This is a book I brought up in the last the last episode as well. Um, Thinking about the number 6. Um, so it's symbolic of ambivalence and equilibrium, union of the two triangles, fire and water. So the elemental symbols there. And hence signifies the human soul. So a duality here again, pointing to a soul, and we had the mention of the soul earlier as both the maidens on the Tarot de Marseille card, referencing the spiritual and the animal portions of the human soul, and ultimately from the Big Book Tarot. That's the other big book that I did. I brought that one up, I believe, in the last episode as well, or at least I did feature this recently. This is a gorgeous book. This book, just one short little phrase to reference in terms of duality and the Lover's card here is harmony in opposition. So a lot to think about there. It is such a beautiful way to think about this particular part of the human condition. This stage in the majors at number 6, how it feeds off of other things and other symbolism in the tarot and outside the tarot, and our two different depictions here, both having what can be drawn into a common theme of duality, I think is pretty amazing. I just I really am excited by some of this information that I found in those resources, because I think it just makes this such a richer card for me. It adds a lot of depth, so I'm excited by that. I have a couple different versions of the Lovers here to bring in, and it's funny how after you do a deep dive on something like this, how maybe your opinions can be changed or colored by that in some way, and it can start to bring out things in other cards, or maybe show some lacking elements in some depictions as well. So Tarot of Mystical Moments, again, we have and I just have a couple of examples here, because we could bring out a lot, um, but I think I'd rather just keep it kind of focused on the new meanings I'm finding, or not new, um, uh, the different considerations that the different authors have put into this, but then just bring up a couple of examples in terms of decks that I have. So the Lovers here, we do have a duality because we have the animal spirit. How about that? That's something I never actually considered for this card before, is that duality between the spiritual and the animal. So we have the butterflies coming off of the female and going up and off to the distance. That could absolutely represent the spiritual, and then the animal, of course, on the other side. So we have a certain duality here. We have a really, and then also there are feathers making up her dress and her hair, or at least some sort of hat, but it comes across as hair. So there's a lot here going on with this sense of duality in the animal and the spirit, and I would have not picked up on that animal spirit portion without having read that portion in that Secret Teachings of All Ages book from 1928. So very interesting. Then we have the classic from Pagan Otherworlds. And here we see both depictions kind of wrapped up in one for the tree. So there's a single tree, but he's holding that torch, which threatens to burn those branches. We have the snake. She's holding the apple. So in the background, we do have a bit of a rise there for a hill. I don't necessarily see the water depiction there, but but we do have some of the elements taken care of here in this image. To me, this one does have a little bit more of the romantic feel to it for the Lover's card rather than some of the other imagery that we would now think of with this duality and everything. But um, it does have some of those elements. And from the Light Seers, of course, a very familiar Lover's card to many these days, if not all tarot folks. Um, I like here again symbolism that we're now learning about. So that last or close to the last portion there that I read about for six for the numerological elements, ambivalence and equilibrium. It's the union of the two triangles of fire and water elemental symbols. So interesting that we have that forming between the two of them, which is really interesting. Okay. And then one that a deck that I love, but not necessarily my favorite Lover's card, um, the Corte de Tarocchi. By the way, should be doing um, a video on this, perhaps live on Tarot Stash, Gerald's channel, with I believe Ben is going to be there. So that's coming up, and just watch for his announcement if you haven't been over his channel. Like and subscribe to Tarot Stash, and I think we're going to be going over this deck. So not a lot going on here. We do have the sun, and we do have two people, but that's about where it ends. It's okay, it's fine. That's so. Um, we don't always need those all of those symbolic elements in there. If we've committed to memory more of what's going on, then we don't necessarily need that. And of course the six, if we follow the some of those meanings behind the number six, then that can help inform us if we pull this up in a reading. But we have the a couple of different things here we could try to grab onto for our meanings, but I actually picking that up again with these fresh eyes and looking at doing some research for the Lovers. I found myself being a little bit disappointed in that card, but I love the deck. I just thinking, oh, I wish it just had, one or two extra elements in there. But again, that's fine. It doesn't. Not every card needs to have the full catalog of meanings in it either. Arguably a very difficult thing to pull off, and sometimes people go too far with it, I think, too. Um, so that's it. I'm going to close with I'd like the takeaway. If the takeaway for me, you can take away anything you like from this. Um, but the takeaway for me is definitely a renewed sense of the duality and the importance of that feature of this, but from a deeper level than what I even considered before. Um, and I like the idea of this um, representation of the twofold soul. Um, and I think that especially that section from the magical ritual of the Sanctum Regnum from 1896 that was talking about equilibrium resulting only from the opposition of forces. The active has no existence without the passive. Light without darkness produces no form, and affirmation can only triumph over negation. Love it. Yeah, amazing. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and roll for the next one. So let's see. So this is a 10-sided die. And a reason I'm starting with that, because there is no, first of all, there's no 22-sided die. So I don't have something that'll capture all. I could do a random number picker online or something, but this has a 0 on it. So I feel like that's what this is. So I'm just going with the first 9 cards in the majors, and we'll figure out how to get to the rest of them later. But there are obviously plenty of cards to go through. So let's start somewhere. And we have 4. Okie dokie. So let me get my deck out here, and we'll be going for the Emperor next time around. Okay. So thanks a lot for joining me. I really look forward to the next round of this. This is a fun exercise. I hope you're all enjoying it. Please comment if you have any questions or any thoughts. And I love to hear some additional. We had some great little things that got added in the comments on the last one um, that just didn't come up in the research I did or weren't things I thought of, because that's going to happen. There's so much information out there. So if you have some additional thoughts on the lovers, by all means, please put it in the comments. We'll make this a community resource. I'd like this to be something that people can come back to in the future um, as a repository for information. If they're looking for, deeper meaning on a card, and they had a reading and they're just not quite sure what the takeaway was or how to think about it themselves. Hopefully this search will lead them to something like this where they can go in, maybe watch the video, get some ideas from that, but then also look at the comments and find out what other people had to say. Because we are a community, we are a spectrum, and I want everybody's opinions to play equally here, so we can have a great time and a great resource for everybody. And thank you for watching. I really appreciate it.